Dear participants, a warm welcome to you all for our Twilight Leaders session on sustainable agriculture. The twilight is of course mostly Australian, as in the Netherlands it is morning, and our participants from the Netherlands have a full day ahead. I'm happy to be able to welcome so many of you. I'm counting over 70 attendees. In particular, I would like to welcome the speakers for today's online session. From the Netherlands, Professor Balconender and Hester May of Friesland Campina. And from Australia, Niall Blair and Barry Irvin. Thank you for sharing your expertise and insights with us today. My name is Frank van Beuningen. Just call me Frank, that's the easy part of my name. I'm Consul General in Sydney for the Netherlands, and I also head the economic team of the Netherlands missions in Australia. That is the Embassy in Canberra and the Consulate General in Sydney, where I am located. I'm very pleased we are able to organize today's webinar together with KPMG. This session is also meant as a preparation for the Agri-Track Tour that KPMG will organize to the Netherlands later this year in June. A big thank you to Ben van Delden, who has made this mission to the Netherlands a yearly event, interrupted by COVID, but now that travel again is possible, being organized again. We are looking forward to host our Australian friends in the Netherlands. Before we kick off on substance, please be informed that there is a Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions during the presentations, or if you want to pose a question during the Q&As, please ask your questions here. Let me explain a little bit about the context and purpose of this webinar. Sustainability and circularity are important priorities in the Netherlands government policies, also in our foreign economic policy. For the economic team of the Dutch diplomatic missions in Australia, it is a focus for all themes we are working on, together with our Australian partners. One of those themes we will address today, sustainable food production, an important and relevant topic for both countries. This event is also part of a series of events the economic team is organizing this year in the light of objectives and work of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. Today is the second one. We have done one on green finance. We will have a third one on emission-free transport in the first week of July. Today is really special, however, to have the chairperson of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition on board for this session, and also Friesland Campina, one of the more active companies in the coalition, makes this webinar uniquely placed. The Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition wishes to stimulate dialogue on the transition to a sustainable circular economy among the broader business community and national and international stakeholders. Isn't that exactly what we are working on today? With this event, we hope to spark and continue the discussion on sustainable growth business models and how businesses can create solutions for a more circular agriculture. Let me close my introduction by saying that 2022 is a special year in the bilateral relations between Australia and the Netherlands. We celebrate 80 years of diplomatic relations. Australia and the Netherlands have a thriving bilateral relationship which goes way back. Let me mention one element of that relationship that is not common knowledge in Australia or in the Netherlands. And that is this one. The Netherlands is the fourth biggest investor in Australia, according to the most recent figures of Austrade. So yes, Dutch companies are already active in the Australian market in many sectors of the Australian economy. Today, we will speak about sustainable agriculture production and innovation. And it is an honor and a privilege for me to announce the first speaker, Professor Balconender, Chairman of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. Professor Balconender was a member of the Dutch Parliament from 1998 and Prime Minister of the Netherlands from 2002 to 2010. After his political career, Mr. Balconender not only became chairman of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, but also, since 2010, Professor, Governance, Institutions and Internationalization at the Erasmus University Rotterdam and partner later consultant for EY. Professor Balconender, the floor is yours.
Frank, thank you very, very much. Good evening. Great we can meet online. And this meeting is part of your preparations to attend the Netherlands. And I hope you will have a very inspiring and meaningful visit in the Netherlands. I'm speaking, as Frank already said, in my capacity as chairman of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, DSGC. And why DSGC? 10 years ago, with 8 multinationals, we said we have to join forces. It's all about the full integration of sustainability into business models. And there was also the conviction that we have to work together as companies to learn from each other. I think this was really key when we started. And we said it's all about sustainable growth business models. It's about the implementation of this approach with companies and asking ourselves the question, how can we as companies contribute to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations? How can we contribute to issues around climate change and the circular economy? And in the year 2016, we said we entirely will focus on the SDGs. And why? If we want to survive on this planet, if we want to create better conditions for next generations and for our planet, our common home, and if we are convinced that no one should be left behind, we have to realize the SDGs. The SDGs is a great set of goals that brings together nations, people, businesses, NGOs, universities, and schools. Common goals, offering common language and requiring common actions. The SDGs are connected with the important issue of climate change. And we have to reduce CO2 emissions. Carbon neutrality in the longer run is essential. And all depends on concrete actions and measurement in this age of transition. So a change of mindset and mainstream is necessary. And the same counts for creativity, innovation, and involving young generations. And we have to act quickly because we are running out of time. Another big issue, besides climate change, is the scarcity of natural resources, a very important issue. Just continuing the way we produce and consuming now is a risky affair. It's about the implementation of the concept of a circular economy, and that is essential. A change of production and production styles, sharing, reusing, refurbish, and recycling. Recently, I had a meeting with Peter Bakker, also from the Netherlands. He's the president of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. And he said, besides climate change and circular economy, also would like to underline the importance of the issue of inequality, a big important issue worldwide. And without inclusive approaches and strategies, we will be confronted with huge consequences and difficulties. So realizing the SDGs, fighting climate change, implementing the circular economy and combating inequality, this requires partnerships. Partnerships between the public and private sector, partnerships between countries, partnerships between the universities, NGOs and governments. It's all necessary. And in the Netherlands, and you will know that, you will see it when you are in our country, we are used to it. When I was Prime Minister, we worked on realizing social agreements. And later on, we had experiences with climate agreement and with an energy agreement. It's all necessary. The Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition tries to contribute to these orientations by, for example, developing new views and strategies on transformation. A few years ago, we had a pilot together with Muller-Maersk, the biggest container carrier in the world, about biofuels and shipping, and it attracted a lot of attention. We were thinking, and we have published a report on plastics and the circular economy. We have an annual meeting with the Dutch government this year on the 30th of June, just to talk about points of common interest. We talk with other companies, and we try to involve also the young generation. This is really key. And we have international contacts. All this is also relevant for the world of agriculture. What about feeding people in a sustainable way? Agriculture is extremely important. That counts for Australia, it counts for the Netherlands. It's so important. If you talk about the economic dimension, when we talk about export, agriculture is important. It's about knowledge. In the Netherlands, we have a famous university, Wageningen University and Research, and we have the associations of farmers, the agricultural organizations. We have the financial institutions. The Rabobank is a bank that's very involved in the world of agriculture. But also other issues are important, maintaining our landscape. And if we are taking into account the importance of agriculture, we see it has to do with digitization, one element. It has to do with ESG and sustainability. It's about the needs of the consumers. What do they think about it? And it's about important issues like increasing costs. It's all there. So I think agriculture is extremely important. And if we want to survive on this planet, we have to rethink we are organizing agriculture. I think Australia and the Netherlands can learn from each other. Therefore, I'm so happy with this meeting, but also with your visit to the Netherlands. We are like-minded countries. I've been once in Australia and it was a great time. I love the Australians. It has to do with the mentality, the people. I had a great time. I hope to come back. And one thing is very clear. If we want to survive on this planet, we need each other. And therefore, I'm so happy with this event. And Frank, I give back the floor to you. It's an honor to be with you. I wish you the best with the preparations for the stay in the Netherlands. I hope you have a great stay in the Netherlands and hope to meet you sooner or later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Balconender, for your stimulating words, and good to hear that you already visited Australia, because I can only say that indeed it's a wonderful country to live and to work in. And if I may say so, in today's context, you've given the participants some food for thought also, and I expect you will have triggered many responses and questions that will come up hopefully during the Q&As. Without further ado, I would like now to introduce our second speaker from the Netherlands, Hester May. Hester May is Global Director Corporate Affairs and Farm Sustainability at Royal Friesland Campina. On behalf of Friesland Campina, she is a member of the board of the combined Dutch dairy companies, NZO, and the dairy advocates organization, Zuivel NL. In addition, she is a member of various organizations, such as, very relevant for today, Liaison of the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition. Before joining Royal Friesland Campina, Hester worked in government positions, among others as Vice Mayor of Amsterdam and as a member of the Executive Board of the Province of Overijssel. Hester, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frank, and thank you for having me. I'm very honored to address a couple of words in a few minutes towards you all on sustainable agriculture in the Netherlands. I'd like to address 3 points. First of all, some key indicators in our environment where we are active in. Then our Friesland Campina sustainability goals, and at last some challenges. But let's start with what do we see in our work field. Well, first of all, we see that the sustainability agenda in governments like the European Union with the Green Deal, but also national, is extremely high. Of course, the climate goals and the agreement of Paris, well below 1.5 degrees Celsius, is one of the goals. But not only on CO2 we have ambitions, we also have a ceiling with phosphate, for example, and goals on nitrogen, because they have effect on biodiversity. So shorter supply chains, more inclusive production, increasing biodiversity, producing more biological or nature inclusive or more extensive agriculture is very high on the governmental agenda. Second, we see an increasing pressure from the public, who is, by the way, not willing to pay for the environmental price from the products, but especially NGOs are pressuring very hard. We saw in the Netherlands a lawsuit against Shell that they did not come by with their ambitions on sustainability, and we see that now these NGOs are putting their, let's say, errors on other sectors like ours, for example. So a lot of pressure to produce more environmental and animal friendly. Third is that there's more protectionism. I think you all saw that with COVID and now with the Ukraine, that borders are more protected for local entrepreneurship, which is logical, but makes export, of course, a little bit more difficult. And last but not least, we see an increasing request from our clients, and we have Nestlé, Danone, Unilever as clients, to demand for lower footprint on the products, which they are willing to pay for, by the way. Well, what is our answer and our agenda? Well, we are, as Friesland Campina, the seventh largest dairy company in the world. We are a cooperative company, so that means that we are owned by member farmers, in our case 11,000. We have 23,000 employees, 11 billion revenue as a result, and we are active in 36 countries and give our products in more than 100 countries in the world. So we do make a difference. And we have a very ambitious sustainability strategy, Nourishing a Better Planet, which contains, among others, specific elements around climate and nature, of course. Our goal is, just like everybody else and governments underlined that already, to become climate neutral in 2050. And we have a very important milestone in 2030. Our emissions at the farm level, for example, will cover about 50% of our total emissions. We want to reduce by 33% in 2030 already. And there is the difficulty that there is no one size fits all for our farmers, because all farmers differ. So we have a set of possibilities, from renewable energy, feed additives, towards deforestation-free soy, that they can choose from, and which really fits the best with their management activities. Second, I'm proud to say that globally, Friesland Campina already has 100% green energy. But that's not enough for us. We now have 50% generated from this green energy by our member farmers, and we do want to increase that by 2025 to 100%. So we are not offsetting the energy, but we are going to for the insetting. In addition to reducing emissions of our member farmers' milk, the so-called Scope 3, Friesland Campina also focuses on the total supply chain. So that includes Scope 1 and 2, the global factory network, and the milk transport. And our ambition there is even higher. We want to reduce that footprint by 63% by shortening chains and materials, of course, and investing in cleaner factories. We have more than €1 billion to invest in that. And maybe good to mention as well, another Scope 3 emission includes packaging and raw materials like sugar and cacao. And here we want to reduce by 43% in 2030. And of course, in 2025, we will, in our total packaging portfolio, be 100% reusable and recyclable plastic and packaging. So that is an aim for us as well. Well, do we see challenges? Yes, we do. In our discussion with our governments, I mentioned before, with their ambition, we see that governments in basic do not have the holistic view we have as a company. We have more an integral approach, and therefore it's extremely important that we keep on talking with the governments about their policies and about their funds they're making, that they fit in the integral approach we work in. Second, competition. As you know, pricing is international in our business. The milk price for starters, with all the others as well. And externalities are like emissions are not priced in yet. Of course, there is a discussion about true pricing and taxing CO2, but with a consumer, like I said, who is not willing to pay yet enough, and growing market, we really need the government to look at a more level playing field, and I think we should start that discussion, all of us. And third, that's the last point I'd like to make. That's a challenge as well. We are not only proud of the dairy products we make, and like I said, we make a lot of them, and millions of people every day consume them. But we are looking at new business models as well. So the Ukraine crisis in the Netherlands showed us that there is really a huge request for new energy. And we have manure, we have solar, wind, and nature possibilities to fit that request. So that is a new business model. We are looking at plant-based as well. Also, health is one of the markets where we are, is a growing market where we are active in. And not to forget transparency. because we have tangible criteria, we have all kinds of instruments, and we can measure everything. We know the footprint of all our farmers, for example, and we know exactly what we can reduce where. So, long story short, yes, it's a very active time. A lot is happening around us in the world we are active in, but it is now the time, like Jan-Peter Balconender said as well, to do something and invest in sustainability. I think we should do that for our generation, but also for the generation to come. And I'm very proud to be able to do that with a large team and with a lot of other companies I'm active in, like the Dutch Sustainable Growth Coalition, to make steps and be part of this nice, well, let's say, roadmap towards sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hester, for those comments and remarks. It's wonderful to hear the activity, the traction that Friesland Campina has been driving, and we do look forward to discovering that firsthand in June when we visit with you. And I look forward to the Q&A session that Michele Allan will run shortly and unpack some of those topics. I would now like to introduce our next speaker, the Honourable Niall Blair. Niall Blair has served the New South Wales Parliament for nearly 9 years. During his tenure, he was appointed as the Deputy Leader of the Government of the State of New South Wales, as well as important ministerial positions of primary industries, water, lands, trade and industry. And it's the confluence of those that really link through this agenda of sustainable food and exports to the world, as we're talking about this evening. In his role, Niall has delivered significant reform across water, fisheries and agriculture research and innovation sectors, and has now, subsequent to leaving politics, been an active governor across horticulture industry organisations, as well as serving as the Professor for Sustainable Food Systems at Sturt University, and more recently becoming an Executive Director of the Regional Circularity Cooperative. With that, Niall, I'd like to welcome you to share your views on this important topic this evening.
Thanks, Ben, and good evening and good morning to everyone. And before I'd like to commence, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands that we're gathered on here this evening here in Australia. And as we have the Chancellor from Sturt University on here, I think it's fitting to say Yindi Yamara Wingaranara, which is Wiradjuri language for respectfully knowing how to create a world worth living in, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and thank them for their custodianship. It's really interesting to hear from our colleagues in the Netherlands, and I think we've got some similar challenges here in Australia, but probably a little bit behind the 8 ball in comparison to where the Netherlands is. And it's also great to hear from Jan-Peter, another former politician, using his powers for good after leaving politics and helping to address the biggest issues that our planet and our industries are facing. As I said, I think in Australia, we're a little bit behind the Netherlands when it comes to our transition, particularly our food and fibre sectors, towards net zero. Although I think we've started a bit later, I think we're rapidly picking up pace, and we need to move very quickly. I think one of the reasons we have started a little bit later has been our geographic isolation. We haven't had the pressures from our neighbours. We're not part of the EU. We don't have green deals and things like that. And we are starting to see the SDGs become more of a focus in conversations here in Australia, but it's certainly not something that has been getting the attention that it has in Europe. We're also a continent nation, so we have a lot of land here in Australia. That means up until more recently, we've been able to utilise landfill as an option for our waste. And in some cases, up until very recently as well, we've been exporting a lot of our waste into Asia. Our energy generation in Australia, once again, has predominantly been built off the back of our coal and gas reserves. So that has meant not just has the generation relied upon those fossil fuels, but our distribution and transmission networks have been largely built around those assets. And a lot of those generation assets are coming off line within the next 10 to 15 years. And again, probably I would say one of the biggest differences that we have here in Australia in comparison to the Netherlands has been a lack of clear, agreed and consistent policies from our state and federal governments when it comes to the areas of sustainability, net zero and energy transition. So that has meant we've had more of a leadership role taken up by industry, and they're the ones that have been driving, particularly the multinational companies that are based here in Australia, and really setting some of the conversation. Governments have set targets, but we have a federal election this coming Saturday here in Australia, and it's not something that has been front and centre, that has bipartisan support to say where we need to be as a nation. That's predominantly being driven by consumers, shareholders, and also the leaders within our sector here in Australia, both in advocacy groups, but also in our large companies that have really set the scene. We've also, like the Netherlands, have a more informed consumer these days that is concerned about the stewardship of natural resources. We have big extremes here in Australia. We have severe droughts, and at the moment we're going through quite a wet spell here in Australia. We've had a lot of flooding over this summer, and we have a more informed consumer that's worried about biodiversity and also the impact on our natural resources from our food and fibre production systems. And like our cousins over there in Europe, we have been severely disrupted through the COVID pandemic, particularly through our supply chains. I'm involved in the mushroom industry. We rely upon supplement for our mushrooms coming out of the Netherlands. We also import peat from Europe. And anyone that's doing business in Australia is struggling with those supply chains, whether it's the availability of containers more broadly, whether it's interrupted shipping lines, or even just the availability of pallets here in Australia to be able to move our fresh produce around. But our sector is absolutely committed to making sure that we see growth. We have a target of $100 billion in farm gate output by 2030 that's been set by our National Farmers Federation and has been backed by our government. But the key is how we do this in a sustainable way. And some people have said that trying to get all of our different production systems and industry groups together to be able to achieve this is like herding cats. I don't agree. I think herding cats is quite easy. When you show them where the milk bowl is, they'll come to the milk bowl. And that's where I think the opportunity lies here for Australian agriculture and our food and fibre systems, because I genuinely believe a solution to a lot of our challenges is holistic implementation of circular economy principles. And that's something we're very keen to learn a lot more as to the experience in the Netherlands. And Barry is going to follow on in a moment and show the real life example of how we're trying to implement this in a particular region. But making sure that we get our community, our governments, our research organisations, but more importantly, our industry focused in making sure that we design out, repurpose and valorise our waste streams, reducing emissions, obviously through our production systems, sequestering carbon, to also then facilitate and open up a diversification of economic opportunities for our businesses through carbon trading, allowing a peer-to-peer uptake of renewable energy. So obviously in Australia, we're blessed with plenty of sunshine, and the windmill has been synonymous with Australian agriculture for many years, just like obviously with in the Netherlands as well. But allowing us to bypass that outdated transmission and distribution network that, as I said earlier, has been built off the back of those coal and gas generation assets. Unlocking peer-to-peer transition of renewable energy is also something that we're looking to explore. In the disruption of our supply chains and also looking towards that net zero approach, we need to have those shorter supply chains. This has then started to reinvigorate the concept of localised value adding and manufacturing here in Australia. Quite often we're shipping most of our bulk commodities offshore and letting other countries, particularly through Asia, do some of the value adding and then potentially sending them off to other markets. The conversation has been reignited now because of those disruptions in supply chains for more localised manufacturing, which is going to create new businesses, more jobs, and more importantly, allow a lot of our skilled workforce throughout our regional communities that have been working in those traditional areas in energy or primary industries to be able to move into the next cycle of their careers. At the forefront of all of this, though, and one of the key concepts to making sure that we adapt that circularity approach is the way that we manage biodiversity and our natural resources in a much better way to achieve those nature positive outcomes. And we're really pleased here in Australia to start to see biodiversity becoming part of the conversation and very much at the forefront of what we heard about in COP. And we're hoping to see some national targets here in Australia also set for biodiversity. And as we move towards the circular economy, I think we get to do something that has been lacking here in Australia, and that's move the argument away that we've seen here in Australia around sustainability being a left versus right challenge. We don't have a general agreement on the whole political spectrum in this country that we must address climate change, that we must move towards carbon neutrality, that we must have a number one commitment to managing our natural resources, but at the same time, keeping us to produce the food and fibre that we do. We are a net exporter. We are very good at what we do, but my wish is that as we transition from that linear economy into a circular economy in the food and fibre sectors here in Australia, it takes away the arguing, it takes away the disagreements, and it moves it away from what has traditionally to this point been really an argument around values and views, and we move it into more of an economic argument that is putting our industries and the communities that rely upon them at the centre of the discussion. That's a very quick snapshot of the context that we have here in Australia, and I'm looking forward to setting it up for Barry to be able to demonstrate how we're looking to achieve it. So thanks, Ben, and thanks everyone for your time.
Thanks, Niall. As we're thought-provoking views on where we've come from, but what we have ahead of us as well. And in the context of the comparison between Australia and the Netherlands, it's interesting, Niall, when you reference the $100 billion target farm gate value that NFF and the Australian government has signed up for, and then you look at the export level of earnings that the Netherlands achieves from agriculture and food, and it's effectively 3 times what Australia is achieving, but it's a nation that's 2/3 the size of Tasmania, and a pretty sobering perspective when we stop and think about that we're getting 630 times more value out of a hectare of productive land in the Netherlands when you put it all together compared to what's being achieved in Australia. So very different farming systems and a lot of input and value add activities. And we look forward to discovering that on the KPMG Agri-Food Traction Tour next month. I would like now to introduce our last speaker from the Australian side before we move into the questions and answers session that will follow. And it's with great pleasure that I introduce Executive Chairman of Bega Cheese, Barry Irvin. Bega Cheese, for those of you who have yet to taste their products, Vegemite, Farmers Union, Dairy Farmers, Daily Juice, amongst others, is one of Australia's largest food producers with revenues exceeding $3 billion. Bega Cheese, of course, moves its products not just around Australia, but into 40 countries around the world, and is leaning into the challenges of circular agriculture and sustainability in a really progressive manner. So much so that in his limited spare time, Barry Irvin does 2 other things. He likes to ride his bike and be with his family, but aside from that, he's also the Executive Chairman of the Regional Circularity Cooperative and chairs Giant Steps, a program focused on supporting families with children with severe autism. So Barry, I'd like to ask you to take the microphone and talk to us a little bit about the context of being a food producer in Australia and the importance of circularity as we move forward and shift the dial for this country.
Thank you, Ben, and lovely to be with you all. both this evening and in the morning in the Netherlands. Look, I have to say it's a real honour to be with this panel of speakers, and I'd also want to reinforce Niall's acknowledgement of country. I'm coming to you from Ewan country down on the lower south coast of New South Wales. I think the interesting thing about Bega Cheese, the company, is that it indeed has a home, and the home is in the Bega Valley, which is, as I said, Ewan country, and it's a unique valley, and we're very proud of our origins, but we're also very proud of the fact that we now have 20 manufacturing facilities across the country, and we produce, as Ben mentioned, not only a myriad of dairy products, but also perhaps one of the most original circular products in Vegemite, which of course was a byproduct from brewer's yeast, and was made to find a use for brewer's yeast back in the 1930s. But we are extraordinarily focused on our entire supply chain. I myself am a 6th generation dairy farmer, and my son runs our dairy farm. So we have always, as a company, acknowledged the importance of the farmers that we work with, the land that we are custodians of, and indeed all our activities right through the supply chain to our customer. But in particular, the fact that for Bega, we operate in regional communities around the country. And so we've been extraordinarily focused for a great many years on making sure that we were meeting the expectations of our community. Whether that be our customer, whether it be our politicians, or whether it just be the people that we live and work with every day. And so sustainability was something that became very natural to us. But I have to say that in recent times, my thinking has moved from that journey that no doubt many on this call have already had, from thinking about sustainability to thinking about circularity. And it is a genuine difference. And as I come to you from the Bega Valley, and many may be aware of the Black Summer bushfires that we experienced in Australia in late 2019, 2020. The Bega Valley was one of those regions that affected. It is an enclosed catchment. We are surrounded by forests on 3 sides, and the sea on our 4th side. So we literally do live in a catchment where everything can be measured. And I have lived in this region for a great many years, for all my life. And when I saw both the impact of those fires, but when I have been very aware of the need to change our approach, and the need to take our farmers along with us as we change the approach, but not only our farmers, the entire community, I began to talk more about circularity. I have to say that it was Rabobank that first came to me and started chatting to me about circularity and whether we could adopt the principles of circularity in our manufacturing plants. And we decided that we would do trials in the home of the company in Bega. And we began to do those trials, and we began to train our staff at our 2 manufacturing sites in the Bega Valley to see what progress we could make, how we could improve our footprint by adopting the principles of circularity. Interestingly, when we had that education system with us, when we had people training us, it became very clear to me that whilst it would be very good for Bega, and as it is very good for the Australian dairy industry and each industry, to try and take steps forward and take actions that will make a difference, it won't make the difference we need unless we take everybody in the community along with us, unless we make a change that includes everybody. And as I was discussing that with my many colleagues and my friends from KPMG and Rabo and many others, we decided that we would try and have the very bold ambition of converting this valley in which I speak to you from. It's 650,000 hectares. It includes everything from national parks and forestry right through to agriculture, estuaries. It's famous for its oysters and indeed fisheries. Its population relies on, obviously, the healthcare and education that comes from this region. It is a truly diverse region. Tourists flock here for our beautiful beaches and our beautiful scenery. So our view was that we needed to convert the entire valley from a linear economy to a circular valley. And to do that, we needed to consult with all in the valley, from our Indigenous community right through to representatives of all those industries I just named. We have looked to speak with everybody from, as you would expect, dairy farmers and beef farmers, to those that deal in forestry, to those that deal in building, for those that deal in horticulture. We indeed even found 3 gin distilleries as we were looking to consult with our community. We have made sure that we have included everybody from the community, including local government and state government, to discuss what priorities we would need to adopt to make sure that we could go on the path of making genuine change in this region. I might say that and Niall referred to it earlier, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. So much so, and so much to the point where we had such goodwill in people wishing to get involved with our projects around circularity, that we decided that we should create a different entity. So this wasn't seen as a corporate initiative, but it was seen as both a corporate, community and government initiative. And the way to do that was to create a non-distributing cooperative. So we've created a cooperative, a regionally based cooperative, that will have both corporate members and indeed it has members. Of course, Bega is a member there, but when we look at Australia's largest landowner, AACO is a member. We are looking at technology companies joining as members. Most of the research groups are joining, and a number of universities have joined as members of this non-distributing cooperative. The local council has even joined, to make sure that we have all the information we need, all the knowledge that we require, so we can facilitate actions on the ground, whether they be research projects that will prove a concept that will then able to be applied in the valley and beyond, or indeed whether they be us disseminating information to assist farmers, estuary managers, forestry managers, to ensure that they are adopting the best practice possible. I think the most important thing in what we are doing here is that we are linking all that knowledge together and all those industries together. So we have those involved with forestry speaking with those involved with estuary management. We have people involved in horticulture giving advice to those involved in pasture production. We are extraordinarily focused on not just ambition around emissions and not just ambitions around packaging, which is obviously some of the things that the industry is strongly focused on, but we're focused on everything from water, biodiversity, soil, nutrition, right through to animal care, but of course community education, disability, aged care. One of our key initiatives is to try and do a baseline study that is not just about sustainability, but to get baseline data that covers social, environmental, and economic outcomes, so that when we do our work, we will be able to present the improvement that we've been able to achieve by adopting the principles of circularity. The ambition here is to make the Bega Valley the most circular valley in the world. Our ambition is to in fact have a circularity centre where people from around the world can come and view not only the work we're doing, but real-time data that demonstrates the validity of that work. Our ambition is to actually create a circular region, not because we want a competitive advantage, so we can share it. So we can share it across those coastal regions around the country. This is a diverse country. I know when I speak to, we have farmers that produce milk in the tropics and farmers that produce milk in very cold weather to the south of us. We have peanut farmers, we have orchardists that all provide us with raw materials. putting all their knowledge together, along with the knowledge of our estuaries, the knowledge of the opportunity around things such as seaweed, is extraordinarily exciting for us. We're extraordinarily grateful for those people that have come to us already and joined as members of the cooperative. We believe that this will be a wonderful start. We're very thankful to Rabobank and KPMG that have been helping us on this journey as we've put this together. But we believe that by including all in the community, by making this an organisation, and the purpose of the non-distributing cooperative was that you could have corporate members, but you could also have community members, and they would all receive a different level of outcome, if you like. But in terms of our community members, us supporting them in their individual path to lighten their footprint, to do better, or our corporates in terms of inputting and sharing knowledge and advantage and experience from what they've done, has been extraordinarily important. So I think this is one of those circumstances where we would see the prize being great. We would see the prize being great both from three perspectives, both from socially, economic, and environmentally. But we would also see it being a prize that is shared. And I think that's the great thing about what we're doing here, is that we're all working for a similar goal with great outcomes in mind, and indeed the opportunity to share those outcomes with many.
Thank you, Barry. That was really insightful, and I'm sure you've inspired lots of people to find out more about the Regional Circularity Cooperative. So for those of you who are interested, info@begacircularvalley.com.au is how to reach out. I'd now like to introduce you to our facilitator for the Q&A session with the four speakers, and welcome the person who I affectionately like to refer to as Dr. Chancellor Chair, Michele Allan. Michele is the Chancellor of Charles Sturt University and Chair of numerous boards, including Apple and Pear Australia, the Food and Agribusiness Growth Centre, FIAL, the Trusted Autonomous Systems Defence, CRC, and Wine Australia as an RDC. Michele is also a non-executive director of the nation's National Science Organisation, CSIRO, and on the board of Food Agility and SmartSat CRCs, and of course, Dairy Food Safety Victoria. Welcome, Michele. We look forward to your question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. And I'm going to start with Hester. Hester, what do you think, following on from Barry's discussion, what do you think is the biggest reward for adopting circular economy in any business?
Well, the biggest award is, I guess, that people enjoy your product in the end. So let's start with that, because we do have a high nutrition value with our product. But we see that there is a gap between knowledge on the way we produce and the way the consumer thinks of our way of producing. So the biggest reward is as well if we have people coming to our open farm days and enjoy our advertorials we make with the 13 largest dairy companies in the Netherlands together combined, to show to every consumer in the Netherlands that we have young, enthusiastic farmers who make beautiful products. So I think those are the biggest awards.
Thank you. Jan Petter, I have a question from Luke for you. And he's wondering how he'd like to understand how the Dutch agriculture, or how the Dutch government moved agriculture to carbon neutrality, and has this been producer or government led?
Thanks for the question. It's a very important one. At this moment, you can see there is a kind of awareness, and that counts for and the government and the private sector. So it is in fact about the whole ecosystem. So if you are reading documents from the government, then it's about carbon neutrality. It's about reducing CO2 emissions. But if you listen to, let's say, the private sector, you will hear comparable voices. I'm representing the organization Dutch Growth Coalition. Already for years, we are underlining the fact that we have to change business models. And if you talk with people in the agricultural sector, things are changing at the moment. People do understand that we have to perform in another way. So it is not an or, but it is an and situation. And we are really convinced that if you want to be successful, and therefore I would like to underline SDG number 17. SDG number 17 is partnerships for the goals. I remember Ban Ki-moon, when we started with the SDGs, he said, we will never reach the SDGs without the private sector. So therefore, you need and government and businesses and knowledge centers, and of course, the agricultural sector. And having said that, I must say I was very inspired by the words of Niall and Barry. It underlines you need each other. We need breakthroughs. We need each other. So that's really key if you talk about how to realize things. You must keep each other sharp. For example, when I'm reading documents of the government, of course, there's a reference to SDGs, but is under the umbrella of development cooperation. Of course, that's a broader dimension. We talk about it. But I noticed in the meetings we had with the Dutch government, it's so important that you say, let's work together. For example, if there's a state visit of our king to other countries or prime minister, ministers, sustainability is always on the agenda. This makes you strong. You really need public-private cooperation. So it's not or the government or the agriculture sector, we need all.
Thank you very much. So Niall, I've got a question for you. How widespread do you think the awareness is of circularity practices in terms of food producers and processors?
Look, I think there's awareness, but I also think there's confusion. I think some people still just think we're talking about recycling when we talk about circular economy principles. So I think the initiatives, for example, that Barry's talking about provides, I guess, the area and the showcase where people can actually have a look and learn. And that's what I also love about the education piece and the Circularity Centre. That's part of what's happening in Bega, to provide that education piece. So I think there's awareness. I also think that there is a bit of a not knowing where to start to apply circularity principles to a business. And sometimes there can be analysis paralysis. So, it's probably a bit of a plug to our sponsors, KPMG, organisations like that can come into a business and help an organisation do a material flow analysis, find out where the opportunities are to transition into that circularity is probably the best place to start. So I think there's awareness. I think there needs to be more education, but I think there needs to be assistance to help businesses transition. It's still a relatively new concept in some sectors here in the country. We need to learn from the experiences that our colleagues in the Netherlands, for example, are doing. And I think what the Bega Circularity Project is offering as a real showcase is where we're going to see it be applied on the ground. Thanks,
Niall. So Barry, as a lead off from there, what are your thoughts on what's needed of circular agricultural practices in Australia?
So look, I think there are two things, and I think Niall's comments were very relevant. In terms of what's needed, I think there are two levels. That the information I talked around baseline, I think, is really important, and I think getting all the baseline data right and in a form that is accepted and acknowledged, I think is very important, because that gives you something to build on, and it helps you inform whoever it might be, whether it's a customer, your community, or indeed a farmer. I think for farmers, we have, as Hester mentioned earlier, every farmer is different, and you need to very much acknowledge each of their differences. But again, our experience in the past is that as we bring good practice to them and good sustainability practice to them, they will embrace it, provided you give them the good information as to why, and you actually give them the path for that being implemented in their farm. And we see that time and time again, as we have in the past invested significant company money into farm sustainability, but we've seen them not only embrace those projects, but then invest much more themselves to build on those projects. So I think investment is important across the whole sector. So investment is really important in making sure that baseline data is correct, and investment in education and support for our farmers. We'll see them, I am sure, absolutely embrace the ideas of circularity. And to not take too much more time, but interestingly, the supply chain disruptions that we've seen in recent times, I think, create the perfect environment and the perfect opportunity to talk to both farmers and the business sector about how we can do this better through circularity. And I think, so I think we've got a very willing to listen audience, but we've got to make sure that we are, we're getting good information to them, not overloading them with information.
Thank you, Barry. So Jan Petter, Mirjana has a question. And the question is that the Netherlands has a long history of collaborating and working together towards a common goal, whereas Australia is quite young at that, and we don't tend to work very well together. Do you have any, using her vernacular, pearls of wisdom that you could share with us of how we could collaborate more in Australia?
It's a great question of Mirjana, and she refers to, let's say, the history of the Netherlands. And we are a country that's partly below sea level, so we are used to the necessity to work together. We call that polder model. So if you want to keep your feet dry, you have to work together. So that is a part of our history. We've always seen that when we talk about, let's say, the organization of the economy, you must have cooperation between the government and the social partners. When I was Prime Minister, we realized many reforms, but always in line with the dialogue with the social partners. During the last 10 years, we've seen the development of energy agreement and climate agreement. So people do understand that if you want to be successful, if you want to change things, you must have the cooperation between the government, the businesses, the knowledge centers, and the NGOs. And that makes you stronger. And if you talk about, let's say, changing things, this is a matter of you have to involve all stakeholders. We have discussion about stakeholder capitalism, for example, that has to do with the fact you need them all. And it's my conviction that if you don't have the right cooperation, you miss chances. For example, I listened carefully to what Niall and Barry have said, and Barry mentioned the word education piece. All the universities of applied science in the Netherlands, they've integrated SDGs into their curricula. When these students are starting to work, they will bring in that information, their knowledge, than the companies. Other example, big corporates are interested in the role of startups. Why? Because of the fact you must have new ideas, new visions. And if the government wants to realize things, you must have also the private sector on board. I'm really convinced that if you really want to change, if you really want to achieve the SDGs, for example, it must be a common approach. And I think we also have to be very practical, because it's not so difficult to have a lot of goals. The question is, what's really changing? Therefore, Barry, what you're telling is extremely important. So if you want to be successful, it's always about which actions are we taking? Can we measure those developments? And do we have the right cooperation? These things are really key. That doesn't count only for the Netherlands. In fact, it's also, you must have an international approach. Last remark, now you mentioned the word net positive. I like that. That's the title of the book of Paul Polman. And Paul Polman was the former CEO of Unilever, and he was one of the founders of our DHEC. So I'm very happy with that remark.
And there was one more question, which said, how much does technology play in this change? And I put, you need everything, including technology. So, and I'll put a plug in for both the Traction Tour. For those who are going this year, have a fantastic time in the Netherlands. For those who haven't been, get your backside trackside, because it's fantastic get together of people and ideas for changing agriculture in Australia. And finally, the second plug is for the Digital Agri-Food Summit, where you can meet both Barry and Niall and Ben at the Wagga campus of Charles Sturt University on the 1st and 2nd of June. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Michelle, and what a great leaders session this has been. I've found it to be really informative, and thanks to Jan Peter for telling us the story of how to mobilise the corporate sector in the Netherlands to drive change, to Hester May for sharing with us all that activity from farm gate to consumer that you're working on with Friesland Campina around the world, Niall for the backdrop of where we've come from and some insights on where we need to get to organise ourselves for impact more in Australia, and Barry for the leadership and the vision to move beyond sustainability to circularity in an organisation that then spills over into a regional impact. All of those insights have been incredibly valuable, and Michele, thank you for extracting more of that from our speakers tonight. Tonight is only possible because of that partnership that Frank mentioned between the Netherlands Consulate and KPMG, and we really appreciate, Frank, the ongoing support that your organisation brings to the conversation around food sustainability, but also bilateral trade between the Netherlands and Australia. 80 years of history being marked today, and I think 400 years of connection between the countries. And that just leaves me to say from the Kulin Nation and the Wurundjeri people here in Melbourne, where I'm calling from tonight, thank you all for dialing in, and we hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to sharing the recording with you and seeing many of our new Dutch friends in the Netherlands in June on the Traction program. Tot ziens, dank u wel, thank you very much, and have a great evening.